Hi, everyone. As you're coming on in, and before we get started, my name is Mindy Levine. I'm going to be hosting this conversation. Hello, hello. Feel free to use the chat. And before we go over some introductions and the framework for this discussion, I thought we could do about a 2-3 minute embodied practice. So I'm going to pass this over to Sydney. And you're welcome to participate as much or as little as feels useful for you.
Thank you, Mindy, and welcome to everybody. So glad that you took the time to come into this space to learn about the Center for Trauma and Embodiment. Really appreciate your presence for sure. Just before this invitation to experience this particular embodied practice, because that's part of our name as an organization, as a matter of fact, the Center for Trauma and Embodiment. I wanted to just kind of give you a few pieces of understanding for those folks in the space that may not really understand what that word embodiment means. And the essence of it is being with your body. Because many times we humans can be with our minds, but not so connected to our bodies and the sensations that arise in our bodies, the sensory and the motor, the movement, not so connected to those sensations. So that's what this really, this particular practice that we call a soft landing. And it means soft landing means we offer a brief practice for 2-3 minutes at the beginning of meetings, just so that we can arrive and land into the possibility of being with not just our minds, but also our bodies. Because there are different ways of knowing. We can know from our minds, but also we can know from our body language, which is through sensation and being with that sensation, being aware of it and feeling and sensing that sensation as wisdom, so that we can make wiser choices beyond just the mind. So if you are interested in participating in this brief practice, you are welcome to stand or you can be seated. It's whatever you would like to do. Again, it will be very, very brief. And a brief practice of maybe connecting to your body and noticing what you're experiencing in that container that holds everything that we experience in life. So one possibility is to, whether you're seated or standing, is to perhaps notice the soles of your feet against the floor, the other surface of support, what that might feel like to you. Another option could be to notice the seat of your body, your sits bones, or maybe the back of your body, and that might be against a surface of support like your chair, or it could be a cushion or something else. So just perhaps taking just a few moments, if you are interested in noticing if there's any sensation that's there, maybe pressure or something else or temperature, or you may not notice anything at all. And then another possibility, if you'd like to continue with experimenting with embodiment practice, is you could do this actually with your eyes wide open. You could also choose to bring your eyes to a gaze that's downward, like toward the floor or the ground, if that's more useful to you. So you have that choice. But another one could be to bring your palms together and rubbing your palms together. Um, and that could be at your own rhythm, your own pace. And if you're doing this, you may notice some sensation. It could be the texture of your hands coming together. It could be, again, temperature. It could be some coolness or some warmth or something else. Might even notice the amount of pressure. Those are different explorations of maybe connecting to your body. And then there's some possibilities of experiencing some movement. And one way of moving, if you'd like to explore movement, could be to lift your chin upward, your head and neck upward to your distance, your range. And another possibility could be to lower your chin downward toward your collarbone to whatever point or whatever range of motion that you would like to experience. And then if you want to, you could link these two movements together. You could lift your chin upward toward the ceiling, toward the sky, and link that with lowering your chin downward toward your collarbone. Feel free to explore this movement of lifting your head upward, lifting your head downward at your own speed. Or you may choose to keep your head in stillness. And then as you're ready, you're welcome to bring your head, if you were moving, back to center or back to stillness. Another possibility of moving with your head and neck could be to turn your head either to the right or the left side toward your shoulder, and maybe moving to whatever particular point or distance toward your shoulder that you might want to experience. Because there is a range of motion, so there's different points, different sizes of movements that you could experience if you want to. And then another one is to turn your head in the opposite direction, the opposite shoulder. And you could link these two movements together if you'd like, turning your head to the right and the left, or the left and the right. It's your choice. Whatever you might want to experience in this present moment. And then as you're ready, feel free to bring your head back to center. And we will begin to end this brief soft landing as we start into our round table. And again, just want to express on behalf of all of us here on the leadership team and our team in general, all of us for the Center of Trauma and Embodiment, just really appreciate you being here. So thank you very much, and peace.
Thank you so much, Sydney. So before we begin, again, my name is Mindy Levine. I went through CFTE's CERT program for trauma sensitive yoga. And then in the beginning of the year, I came on board as the donor engagement coordinator. So you may get some emails or some outreach from me. I'll also put my email in the chat as well. And I just wanted to offer a quick introduction for everybody else here before we start.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're joining us. I'm Jen Turner. My name is Jen Turner. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the co-founder and the co-director of the Center for Trauma and Embodiment. So excited to have this conversation with you today. And thanks for being here.
And hello again, everyone. I am Sydney Spears, a member of the leadership team since 2020. And also I've served as a mentor for the Trauma Center, Trauma Sensitive Yoga program too. So again, welcome to your full selves here.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Emerson. My pronouns are he, him. And I'm also the co-founder and co-director of the Center for Trauma and Embodiment. I'm really happy to be here and share some of our history with you all and have a conversation.
So before we begin, just to go over the framework, we're going to take some time to really share the history and story of CFTE. It's over 20 years, so there's a lot to get to, and then we're going to have some time at the end for some questions. But please feel free throughout the time to put your questions in the chat. We'll moderate that as well and have some time at the end. So the way this is going to be is I may ask a question to one of the people in leadership, but please jump on in. So the first question is to Dave, but anyone can answer as well. I mentioned before that CFTE, Center for Trauma and Embodiment, has been around for over 20 years. So I was curious if you could share more about the beginnings of what is now CFTE, some of that history and story.
Yeah, thanks, Mindy. I started a nonprofit in around 2001, 2002 called the Black Lotus Yoga Project for any old school people here. That was dedicated to teach yoga to people with PTSD, and pretty soon into the process got to partner with a group here in the Boston area called the Trauma Center in 2002, and we began to study yoga for trauma. And the commitment really was, how do we take something that has coming from a space with very little regulation? So those of us who are familiar with the yoga world, it is a place with almost no regulation. And that's problematic when it comes to healthcare, for sure. And for us, trauma care in particular, we felt a real obligation to make sure we were scrutinizing what we were doing. So the partnership with the Trauma Center, which was known as a research institution, was a great way to build that scrutiny in right at the beginning. And so that's really what we did. For the first few years, we did a couple of pilot studies and got to write about those a little bit starting in 2006. Meanwhile, we're just beginning to discover a lot of interest. And our project was pretty small. It was in-house at the Trauma Center, but we were communicating with people and we were receiving interest. So we started to be able to turn around some of that information publicly in 2006 and begin to do some trainings. And then, as time went along, 2008 or 9, we got the first grant given by NIH, the National Institutes of Health here in the United States, to study yoga for trauma. And that was a randomized controlled trial, which maybe we'll get a chance to talk about, like the nuances of research if people are interested. But it's a big, large scale kind of project that takes a number of years to complete and is considered, the gold standard in terms of what is required to give evidence to a new treatment. And I just noticed a comment here, a little bit more information about what that means. So from 2003 through 2004, we did 2 pilot studies. And when you do pilot studies, you're just asking some simple questions like, will people come to the classes? Do they enjoy it enough to show up? And we were getting a little bit of feedback about folks' embodied experiences, their sense of embodiment, their relationship to their body. That was coming back. All of that was really positive. But to really start to prove or build evidence for something, you need to do a more of a scientific methodology. And a randomized control trial, basically, you have the piece of work you're trying to study and then a control group, and folks are randomly assigned. So they don't get to choose which one they're involved in. And that random assignment is supposed to make the data more reliable, strengthens the data. And that's kind of one way to understand it. And then the people that are doing the measurements don't know what group the folks were part of. So it's just intended to create much more robust information for people. And we got the first grant given by the National Institutes of Health to study yoga for trauma, and then just started to build from there.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. And I know, Jen, that you were facilitating a lot of the sessions during that NIH study. And I was wondering if you could talk about that time frame from the study to when you all decided that it was really important for there to be a certification program. So there was research, there was starting to be some evidence-based, and then you began for trauma-sensitive yoga around 2013, I believe, started to do some certification and some trainings. And I was just curious how that evolved.
Yeah, I think that we started our training program doing sort of a foundational training in 2000, or the kind of origins of it in 2006, 2007. I think as we deepened into the work of doing this work of understanding the complexity of holding a treatment space for trauma survivors and really implementing the model, we found that we had to do more training, as we ourselves deepened into the work. It also was somewhat responsive when we were, Dave and I would be leading these 40-hour trainings at Kripalu, and folks would come and ask for more time with us or want more supervision. And so we decided to create a certification program that really centered around supervision and direct relationship building with someone to mentor you into the process. Part of that was also wanting to have having fidelity and having it creating something that was in integrity and not just sort of developing something and putting it out there in the world without knowing what was happening. So really wanting oversight. So the CERT program came out of that, but was somewhat, again, responsive and organic to requests that our trainees were asking for.
Thanks so much, Jen. And then sort of Sydney, I'm not sure if everyone knows, but you came to CFTE via the CERT program for CCTSY, and Jen was your mentor. And your insights played a huge role in starting to shift the dynamics around helping CFTE look at systemic trauma and to begin our anti-oppression work. And so I was wondering if you could share more about that beginning with Jen, and also sort of the impact of your work for CFTE. Oh, I think you're.
Yes, I can certainly do that. And thank you for that inquiry, by the way, to Mindy. I do want to back up just a little bit before Jen, her mentorship with me, because a lot of what I have been offering is truly my deep purpose and my passion. And it actually started when I was a teenager because I was witnessing all of the suffering that was going on in the world. And in particular, people in my family, stories about racism, sexism, patriarchy, ableism, capitalism, and how all of these different systems of oppression actually converge. They are intersected, they're not separate. And how that was truly, truly causing trauma, chronic stress and trauma for people. We didn't name it so much that back in the day, but we are now. So I just wanted to say that because that is in my heart and soul. And so that's what I carry into any work that I do with any organization, any of the past organizations that I've worked with as well. So I was so excited about partaking in the trauma sensitive yoga certification program, and then meeting Jen, and then learning from Jen as well. And then just some of the conversations we had as well. And then I was offered this great opportunity to actually, after the certification, to actually be a part of the assistance for a training. So for other folks who were interested in becoming certified. And I have been thinking, of course, because I've been holding, that's why I gave a little bit of history here. I've been holding my passion the whole time, but also I'm the kind of person that I will remain open to kind of see what's happening here in the organization or the training. And so as a result of that, there came a time at that particular training that I just mentioned that I was assisting Dave and Jen with. I had an opportunity to talk with both of them about the deep need to also be explicit, not that they didn't care about people who were oppressed in the world in a cultural and social way, but to be very explicit within the training and the need for that as well. And then there were people even in the training who had come to me and wondered, well, what this is missing, this whole piece around people who experience social cultural trauma and oppression. We feel like that's missing, and it should be part of the program and the training. So converging with all of that. So it wasn't just me, it was also other people. Converging with all of that, I just have to say this very briefly, that my experience of Jen and Dave and being part of the leadership team in particular, when I started that work in 2020, such cultural humility from both of them. And I was totally impressed because it wasn't like there was this huge pushback about honoring people who have been marginalized, people who have been suffering for years, for generations across different identities and communities, that they were both, in my experience, very open, curious, and willing to learn and do some of the work, a hard work that it takes. And it's not comfortable work doing this, but it's so expansive and it can help us all grow. So that, and then I just wanted to say too briefly that one of the main tenets that I felt like Jen and Dave and everybody else on the team in CFTE held was the anti-oppressiveness lens. And it's one thing to develop the anti-oppressive, that I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to cause oppression. I don't want to generate, trauma that's based from injustices in its various forms as another layer of trauma that many people are holding. That they were very invested in power, because within the word of oppression, there are those two P's that I always say to people. One stands for power that's been pushed down and pressed down with certain folks and communities, and the other one is benefits, privileges, and opportunities and access. Um, so that was a theme that I feel like still occurs with this leadership team and with the staff at CFTE. And I'm so grateful for that. And also this movement toward making our organization more equitable. And it's one thing to think about it, because I've been in other organizations where they just thought about it, or they just did some little quick fix and then they just checked it off for suffering people. Like, okay, we did this one thing, we had this training, so we're done. Like, that's all we need to do. This has been a very, very different experience for me, that they're really walking the walk, not just talking the talk, which is powerful. So thank you for asking me.
Thank you so much. My hand went to my heart. I wanted to, from what you said, kind of step back just for a moment when you're talking about power and this work and this collaboration. This work at CFT has expanded. And so, Jen, I thought I could come back to you. Just backtracking around 2018, a lot of different things happened. There was, if you could talk more about trauma-informed weightlifting, how CFT has expanded into other modalities, trauma-informed weightlifting, and then rescripted, and also the process of moving CFTE away from the trauma center and what you felt you all learned from that process.
Thanks, Mindy. And thanks, Sydney, for all of that. I think so much of what I learned from you is around how we can do this work in a way where we can do anti-oppressive work without replicating the cycle of then oppressing the dominant force, that we can do it in a loving and compassionate way. I've learned that from you time and time again as I've watched you speak and talk and been in conversation with you. And yes, Mindy, to answer kind of what you're talking about, I guess I can start at, for me, around the transition from the trauma center. You know, the yoga program we started at the trauma center, and that was kind of the roots of CFTE. And, you know, we were in an institution where there were folks in leadership who had a lot of power, who have a lot of power in the field of trauma. And what we learned and continue to learn about is when power gets siloed into one or two people, particularly when they also hold dominant identities that are rewarded socially and in all of the ways in our culture, that things go awry. That's like a fertile ground for trauma. And so what we were observing was that it was an unhealthy work environment. It was a place where we would treat our clients, or clients would be treated with care and attention, but the way that colleagues showed up for each other was very different. And it was not a safe place to work, relationally, emotionally depleting. And so Dave and I made the very deliberate and conscious decision to, after a lot of that came to light and people started speaking more about the way that power is being abused at the trauma center, we consciously decided to start our own entity and to remove ourselves. It's been really important for us to talk about that transition and to continue to talk about it, because it's a common phenomenon where we can work in places that have the intention to do really great work, and then we end up absorbing as providers toxicity or harm or trauma. And when we officially kind of started our own entity of CFTE, it was incredibly important for us to show up for each other, for ourselves, with the same care and intention that we do our clients, but also to acknowledge that many of us come to this work with our own complex histories, our trauma burdens, experiences of trauma, vicarious trauma, and witnessing. There's a huge stigma in the field of trauma around that, but it is a reality that many of us are coming with these burdens, and that when we don't extend care to each other and intention and thoughtfulness, then we're doing harm. We're doing harm, and that you know flows out and it will extend to all around us. And in that transition, what was also really wonderful and powerful was we connected with our colleague Mariah, who was also at the trauma center and was very interested in weightlifting and in yoga, and a brilliant clinician. And we invited her along with another colleague to start a weightlifting program with us as we continue to deepen into this work of embodiment. Another intention for us around creating the Center for Trauma and Embodiment was really focusing on embodiment. A lot of times in the field of trauma, you know, there's a lot of exciting new research around different medications or psychedelics or treatment modalities. And for us, we really wanted to kind of keep our focus on the body and deepen into that. And so Mariah joined us in that endeavor as we began to grow and expand, and started the weightlifting program that is now thriving and full of research and trainings and direct care and lots of different projects.
Thanks, Jen. And before we move to sort of the last section before some questions, if you can add a little bit about Restricted as well, the theater for youth that is part of CFTE.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I don't know, Dave, if you want to chime in too.
For sure. I'm also thinking a lot about the conversation that we're having that this is unfolding, and it's making me reflect on our perspective around trauma is about power and the way power gets abused. And, you know, in the Western medical framework, that often gets translated into that dyad. So these are conversations we've had a lot together here and with folks in the community here. is, the dyad where there's a perpetrator and a survivor. And as we've sort of moved more toward understanding systemic trauma, meeting Sydney, having conversations, deepening and developing, it's the same framework. And the research is very clear that it's very clear that the impacts of growing, surviving in the context of an abusive relationship looks very similar to surviving in a culture or society that is oppressing your identities. And so for me personally, it's a continuous unfolding and learning. And I think Jen or Sydney, you mentioned how there's a lot of personal growth that comes with that, as well as like professional responsibility. As trauma care providers, it's become so obvious, I think, to us that we need to be paying attention to our identities. That's not just a buzzword. And we're living in a society that is really making efforts in that direction, and there's a lot of pushback, right? A lot of energy pushing against diversity, equity, and inclusion frameworks, for example. And as trauma care providers, we're adamant that we're going to stand very clearly in the space of understanding that identity is incredibly important and the ways we experience the world. And that means us being responsible for what the world is like for us as people and as care providers. So I just want to kind of name that complexity and that commitment. Rescripted is a theater-based program for youth, and so many kind of beautiful things are involved there. One, our colleagues that started the program were also long-term colleagues at the trauma center who, managed the complexity and the pain of an abusive workspace as well. And meanwhile, they're building something pretty incredible that youth really were gravitating towards. When we got to start the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, it became an opportunity for them to reinvent their theater program. And we could do that in a way that was much more holistic. From our experience, centering the body, we could bring that quality into their theater modality. And it's another program that's starting, it's at the earlier stages, but really beginning to take off, and looking forward to helping that grow the next few years.
And so with that sort of taking off, I wanted to open it up for all three of you for this last part about like what's next. I think 2023, we're coming to the end of the calendar year. It's been a really impactful year at CFTE. If you want to mention some of the things that you've been part of, and also kind of what's next. What's the aspirations? What's the sort of the continued global impact that CFTE would like to have?
Mindy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to share a bit about some of the themes that we've discussed on the leadership team in terms of what you just asked around our aspirations, our kind of vision moving forward. And one of the themes that we have discussed in a very, I felt, heartfelt way for all of us was just to take some space to really, not this quick fix kind of thing, but to take some space and to really reflect, slow down and reflect upon, what we offer, where we've been, where we want to go, and also the need for what we provide, the services that we provide in the world. And one of the themes I really, really remember, I remember all of them, but this one in particular just is so, this is going into greater, I feel like, passion and depth. And it's around humanity. That there's such a need in our conversation, at least among the three of us. We were talking about the need for a sense of humanity all across the globe. And what we are providing programs and services to help alleviate the suffering. And as a matter of fact, to support survivors of trauma to build agency and capacity, and to be able to have their own sense of empowerment in relationship to their bodies, in relationship to themselves, in relationship to others and the world. And how our programming, I feel like, is a big part of rebuilding, or maybe building it all, the sense of true humanity in the world, of non-harming, because not all of us, but many of us across the globe, we either lost it or we never had it. With all the violence, I'm just putting it out there that I feel like, from my perspective, the truth, the violence, the hurt, the suffering, the loneliness, the isolation, trauma in so many different forms, in so many different layers that many people are experiencing and holding. And I think that is a very important part of our aspiration, is to continue in this journey of offering these services that can at least have a part in dismantling the dehumanization that's going on in our world right now.
I love that, Sydney. To me, that encapsulates so many of the conversations that we have. And I also appreciate how we will sort of zoom out like that and talk about sort of these themes that are huge. And then how do we operationalize that? How do we put that into practice? What does that look like if you come to one of our trainings? Do you feel that? You know, if you join one of our Zooms, if you receive a service and you participate in one of the models that we've created, do you experience that empowerment and humanization rather, and agency? That link is something that I think is so fascinating. And so for us, that has become kind of a practice around how do we bring these things to life and take these themes that can feel sometimes overwhelming because they're so big, and operationalize them in the projects that we do, in the conversations that we have. So I think as we look forward, turning toward, for so many years, it was a lot of how do we build this with integrity? How do we do this work? What does this look like? And kind of curiosity and doing the work. And now it feels like we're at a place where the conversation can become bigger, and we can kind of outwardly face with that confidence of the years and years of scrutiny that do continue. This is an ongoing process. That we will continue to sort of enter into these conversations and projects around the globe is the intention. I don't know if you want to add into that, Dave, too.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think for me, for me, and I think for us in a shared way, cross-cultural collaborations are a big part of what we want to do more of. That ranges from, like, with the yoga program, for example, conversations about cultural appropriation and cultural humility and how that shows up and what that means for us to show up in a space like that with our embodied selves. It's different maybe for the weightlifting program and for Rescripted, but working across communities, sharing what we have, learning from others. Really happy about our Indigenous partnerships as they continue to evolve. Transgender youth, specifically want to make sure we get our programs to people in communities that are especially vulnerable and targeted by systems of power in this world. And we've created, models that they're mobile And we have facilitators in over 40 countries, territories, and First Nations around the world. So we have direct experience with these interpretations, I guess I would say, or collaborations. And we just want to do more of that.
Yeah, and I'll add in too that another piece that's been really important is when we go into these communities, that it's not mimicking any kind of colonization, white savior, that we're really looking to train and empower people who have a lived experience of the community that we're working with. A lot of the recent project we've had with refugees in the Middle East has been around that, spearheaded by our colleague Leila Johnson, who has really advocated for how do we empower people who have this lived experience, who have the cultural understanding to take this model, reshape it as needed, and offer it to their community, as opposed to us kind of coming in, potentially doing research or offering a project that is time limited due to a grant and then leaving. Really empowering folks. And that has become one of the ways to operationalize humanity, anti-oppressive work, and empowerment.
Yeah, and Jen, what you just said too, and Dave, both of you, that other theme that I heard Mindy even use the word relationship earlier, when we started, and that is so a part of building an equitable organization, is investing in relationships and being very aware of those power dynamics that are harmful in relationships that can arise. And how do we mitigate that? How do we mitigate it? How do we bring in that anti-oppressive relationship building and sustaining it as well, as opposed to replicating the systemic views and ways and processes of mainstream organizations that are sustaining the harm. But that is so important. And then the relationship that I remembered, one of the themes, kind of sub themes of that was also about we're moving to doing these things inside and out. So within the organization too, not just with the people that we're serving, which, both ends are important, but also within the organization, all the people that are working hard within the organization in various ways to support our aspiration, our vision, who we are, our programs, our services, to also bring that sense of non-oppressive or anti-oppressive relationship and be sensitive to misuse of power within our organization too. And that is different in my experience of organizations. If it is something that's done, and it's not that much, I'm just saying in my experience of working in different organizations, it's outside. But inside the organization, the power dynamics that are harmful can still be flowing, still going on.
Yeah.
And that to me is not embodied. That is not authentic to the mission on the wall or the strategic plan. It needs to be operationalized very sensitively inside and out.
And if I can just add in, I know, Mindy, you're aware of time, I am too. But I have to say, Cindy, I love that. And I had a visual when you were talking too. It's like it is also within our own selves. If we're not doing our own process of self-reflection, it's not like any of us knows the road to get to these places, but we examine, we accept feedback, we accept challenge. Some of the conversations that Dave and I have had through these last 17 years, we will challenge each other in ways that have been incredibly beneficial to my growth as a human, as a leader, as a trauma care provider. And being open and receptive to that is also, to me, part of the health. If we're not doing that internal work, it leaks out. It just does.
Thanks, Jen. I'm sort of transitioning a little bit towards some time for some questions. If you'd like to place them in the chat. I also want to come back to that I am the donor engagement coordinator, which does mean as a nonprofit that I do outreach because a lot of our programming and sustainability and growth depends on the generosity of folks out there in the world. So I'm putting my email again and also our giving page. If it's not feasible, there are other ways where you, in relationship with CFT, can really have an impact. So please reach out. Perhaps you know somebody or an organization that we can collaborate with. Please share this around. I'm happy to offer some time to talk. Anything. There's so many ways. So thank you again for letting me share that. And I wanted to open this up. I'm not sure. I didn't see sort of the results of the poll. I don't know if there was some questions embedded in that, or if anybody has any questions, or even you wanted to expand on something. Um, I have I have one thing. If you'd like to talk in sort of the aspirations, what's next? And we do have aspirations for a podcast. So I wanted to share that if Jen wanted to mention as we're sort of getting some questions here.
Yeah, definitely. Something that we'll be launching in the new year, and hoping to have these kinds of conversations with lots of different people in the world that are doing this work, that are thinking about, writing about, engaging with trauma, power, anti-oppressive work, and kind of paving different ways of being in the world. So really excited to do that, and hope that to share that with you all, and hear your input and feedback around it.
Thanks, Jen. So there was some questions. There was curiosity about the research that just came out, which is big news, and also in a different in a different direction. Also, such an interesting question. It seems the word harm was used differently from trauma, so I was curious the difference. So perhaps spending a few moments talking about the research that was 7 years in the making that just came out, and also about that language.
I can take the research one, and you just make sure you stop me, because I I can easily go on for a long time on this one. But yeah, we just had a paper published, and it was actually a 10-year project. It was about a 3-year period of training the facilitators, then the facilitation and the writing. So it's another randomized controlled trial we talked about at the beginning. This is the largest one with TCTSY and with female identifying military veterans in the United States. The paper's out there. Really excited for you all to check it out and read it. To me, it's the most readable, like data-driven research paper I've seen on yoga and trauma. And the results are, we were testing TCTSY against the gold standard, the standard care people get for PTSD. And there's a whole bunch of nuance in there we won't be able to talk about today, but looking at PTSD symptoms. And TCTSY did just as well, but almost twice as many people completed the cycle, and it looked like the symptoms were reduced in the TCTSY group much earlier in the process. So there's a lot of really encouraging stuff there. We want to make this available to people as a choice. And it's fairly disruptive to the system as it is right now, which tends to understand trauma as a problem of thinking and sort of cognitive processing. And the treatments then are oriented to changing the way you think. And as our conversations unfolded today, we didn't really talk much at all about thinking in terms of trauma. It was about relationships and embodiment. And that's how we, not to say that that's all there is, but it clearly is missing from the mainstream. And it's what we spent a lot of time trying to understand. And that's what these models are focused on. So it's really about relationships and embodiment. And people seem to prefer it. You know, it looks like there's a choice people want to have, and that's part of what we need to do is make it more available.
I can dive into trauma and harm if you want. There's lots of ways that could approach that or speak to that. What's coming up for me in this moment is that, trauma is something that is self-identified, right? Someone can identify for themselves if something has been traumatizing. It's not something that I could decide for someone. It's how it lands in our bodies, our systems, our brains, our memory, our spirit, even, and harm could, in fact, also lead to trauma, but that would be something someone would decide for themselves. Harm is something that I get to also own as potentially someone who has caused harm, that I get to look at. I may not understand the impact. Someone can share with me that impact if they're able to, but I can recognize and acknowledge when I may have caused harm, get curious about it. To me, trauma is how that lands in our bodies and the roots that it has. So that's one way that I sort of think about it. And also that piece around harm is something that I could cause. But if it's trauma, that's not for me to decide for someone. They might reflect that back to me. So those are some distinctions I would make.
If I may, just my thoughts that are coming up when it comes to yoga. Sometimes when yoga is translated, because it's such an old language, there could be a lot of different meanings. And so when in yoga, when we talk about ahimsa, so often the translation is non-harm. Yes, and also a translation can be the disruption of harm, which I think is aligned with CFTE. And what Sydney had said previously, that there's an action to it, and it can be uncomfortable, and it could be in realms of social justice, right? So when we talk about harm and we talk about non-harm, we're talking about how can we disrupt harm to make space for non-harm. That's what's coming up for me.
Thanks, Mindy. I'm so glad you did.
I love that, Mindy. That's a very powerful way to approach it. It really fits with trauma care and trauma healing from my perspective as well. It's not denying harm, right? And it's not pretending that harm isn't part of human life, but it's an active approach to disrupting, to questioning, to wondering about alternatives and making commitment to pursuing possibilities, maybe.
We have one more minute, I think. Shout out to Stefan behind the scenes answering all that's going on in the chat. Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, everybody. It's been an honor to be the host and to be part of this. And I look forward to more conversation with any of you. Please, again, feel free to reach out. I'm gonna hand it over to you all to say goodbyes. But thank you again, everyone. Wishing you ease.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again for being here. And speaking of relationship, it was very nice to be with all of you as well. And I wanted to shout out to you too, Mindy. Thank you for all that you have contributed in so many ways. So really appreciative of you, Dave, Jen, everybody here in the space. Thank you. Thank you.
Right there with you, echoing all that gratitude. Grateful for all of you that are in our community and joining us and participating in this conversation as you did. Grateful to you all, of course, Sydney, Dave, Mindy, Stefan behind the scenes. We should all be as lucky to work with such inspiring and fabulous and funny people. So I'm incredibly grateful.
Yes, and thanks everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your life to be here, and look forward to continuing the conversations.
Take care.